Not so long ago, in living memory in fact, we all followed an Industrial Revolution mindset when it came to work. Most, although not all of us by any stretch of the imagination, got up, had some breakfast, travelled to work, did our job, and then came home again. That's changed. Aided by advances in tech and spurred on by the COVID-19 pandemic, most of us have now learned to make use of teleconferencing, remote work and home offices. Some of us have actually flourished as a result. Granted, usually us neurospicy sorts who aren't great around large crowds, get easily distracted, and find struggle with the day-to-day monotony of office politics. And while many companies are now starting to mandate return-to-office policies, often using quite thinly veiled threats about job security while sprinkling around buzzwords like corporate cohesion and collaborative vision, the experiences of the last 4 years have taught many of us that the old way we did things weren't necessarily always the best. Some countries, including many in Europe and the Americas, have leaned into the concept of remote work, establishing nomad visa programs that let people travel around the world while also holding down a steady freelance job. And for those of us who work in the digital space, working remotely allows us greater flexibility on everything from childcare to free time, reduces our personal carbon footprint, and I would argue can often improve our quality of life. I know from my own personal experience that the 60 minutes a day I now no longer have to spend commuting to our old studio has allowed me to spend more time with my family, as well as spend more time improving my fitness. But all of that only works if you're in a job where you're not required to physically be there. And in industries where things are being made, such as cars, you need very highly skilled people to head to a central manufacturing facility to make the thing. Or still, the places where the thing is made tend to be high-tech, specialist facilities worth huge amounts of money. And thus, we, following our very best Industrial Revolution traditions, have opted to build massive hubs of manufacturing that can often be hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of miles away from where the thing being made will actually be used. And that's true for everything from mobile telephones to computers and cars. But in a world where globalism is quickly falling out of fashion with certain groups of folks, is there a benefit to changing out how our vehicles are made? Are there benefits to local manufacturing that isn't properly being examined? And can local manufacturing help build resilience for the future? I think it can. Let's find out. We'll be covering a whole bunch of topics in this video that will glance at areas that may or may not involve a tiny skosh of politics. So let's go there right now. See, while I'm going to explain how local manufacturing can be beneficial for a whole bunch of reasons, I do want to come out and state, point blank, that import tariffs from one country to another don't encourage local manufacturing. Government investment in local manufacturing is what encourages local manufacturing. So if you are someone cheering about promised US import tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs that will inevitably follow from other nations, you're probably someone who primarily doesn't understand that it's the local consumer who ends up paying for the cost of the tariffs, not the country they're being used against. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably won't enjoy this video, or indeed the logic behind why I am all about local manufacturing. Because for me, it's not about nationalism. It's about community and resiliency. Of course, in order to examine why we need more regional, local manufacturing of electric vehicles in markets around the world, we also need to examine where things are right now, why they are the way they are, and how changing technology means that we don't have to follow the old Industrial Revolution methodology of making something in one place and then shipping it halfway around the world. So, on to where things are right now. Although traditionally, the auto industry does tend to establish production facilities in countries that are part of the market where a new model will be made, European factories for European models, and North American factories for North American models, and Asian facilities for Asian models, that tends to only be true if a vehicle is made in sizable enough volumes. Lower production volume vehicles are often made in one factory and then shipped around the world, often on massive cargo vessels. And when it comes to EVs, they've traditionally been produced in lower volumes and thus tend to be more likely to be shipped from somewhere else. There are exceptions. Nissan, pretty early on, worked to establish redundancy in its Nissan Leaf production. Following the devastating earthquake and tsunami of 2011, it quickly diversified its Leaf production to 3 different locations around the world, one in Japan, one in the US, and one in the UK. But for the most part, that's not really happened anywhere near as often as it needs to. Tesla is another great example of diversified EV production, with facilities in the US, Germany, and China. But it's only really been able to do that using traditional production facilities due to its current market dominance and sales volume. And interestingly, sells a proportion of Chinese-made vehicles in Europe, despite having a factory in Germany. But that's down to labour costs. That's a completely different video. Aside from production volumes frequently lower than internal combustion engine vehicles, for most models that is, EVs are often more likely to be made overseas, or at least a long way from where they're sold, because of all of those extra requirements that come with an EV production facility when we follow traditional methodologies. In addition to requiring different, often brand new equipment for production of a brand new vehicle built on either a dedicated or brand new platform, those facilities also require extra training for staff above and beyond what is normally required for automotive production. They might require extra safety protocols to safely store and handle high voltage battery packs, and very often satellite buildings are required for actually producing battery packs and motors and other things that EVs need. So in short, it's expensive when production volumes are low, so automakers tend to focus their attention on one facility per model and then pay for shipping to wherever those models are needed. And since vehicles are made in one location, it's often easier to change and divert production for whichever market needs the most, making it easier for the automaker to react to EV adoption and market demands. Sometimes they don't even use a facility they own, but instead pay an outside contract manufacturing partner to do assembly under a license agreement. This is riskier, as the company whose badge is on the vehicle often gets less day-to-day control, but it's financially less of a burden when things go spectacularly wrong, as very often the contract manufacturer takes some of that financial burden on board. Talking of risk, keeping one facility often allows an automaker the cachet of producing an EV without diminishing the ICE vehicle output at its other mainstream production facilities. Sure, many automakers promise they're all going electric, but they are still somehow churning out new ICE models too, so go figure. But there are massive problems with this approach, as Nissan found out in 2011, and I think its experience has helped expedite plans to build the Leaf in multiple countries. If you make a model in one place and something happens to the facility or region, from political instability to natural disasters or changes in import-export law, a company's production capabilities and thus its bottom line can be hit pretty hard. The more places something is made, the easier it is for the company to continue making and selling that thing if something bad happens in one of the places where it happens to have a factory. But these days, there's a whole nother problem. Yeah, trade wars. As I've already said, I don't approve of import tariffs generally, and I think they end up hurting the consumer more than anyone else. But when country A decides to throw import tariffs on country B, which then reciprocates with its own tariffs, the cost to make and sell things can get very unpredictable. The same is true for parts. Unpredictable pricing in the EV world is not only a headache, but it can also be the difference between a company turning a profit or not. And for EV-only brands, well, It can be the difference between success as a new brand and a place as an also-ran in the history books. But there's also other important geopolitical headaches coming into play here: resource availability and national security risks. Just as oil's boom in the 20th century led to a whole lot of jostling back and forth between different countries and their governments, so too is the race to mine and refine the raw materials used in EV battery packs. In fact, there's barely a week that doesn't go by these days and we don't hear about some new deposits being explored and new methods to mine and refine those deposits specifically for EV production. And when it comes to EV battery packs, the issue isn't always finding deposits, but finding mineable deposits. Historically, China has dominated lithium mining and refining, meaning it's been able to greatly benefit from the EV battery industry. But as more and more mineable deposits are being discovered elsewhere in the world, that's changing the whole mining and refining landscape dramatically. From South America to Australia and from Africa to Europe, massive amounts of money is currently being sunk into lithium mining efforts in a race to see who will become the oil giants of the EV age. And when a country can mine and refine raw materials needed for EV battery packs locally, it gives that country far more control over the costs associated with and the supply chain security for EV and non-EV battery use. And governments that invest in those mines for domestic use also benefit from not having to worry that their investment is helping a foreign, possibly hostile, rival nation get a leg up on them. And that is basically the logic behind the US's current EV incentive program, as short-lived as it may be. It rewards customers with point-of-sale rebates on new EVs based on a range of factors that include where the vehicle was made and where the raw materials used in the vehicle originated. Domestically produced vehicles with primarily domestically sourced components get better buyer incentives than those made halfway around the world. But there's more to this than just encouraging local production for domestic security. It's also good on the carbon footprint of the planet too. And frankly, maritime safety. EVs made overseas need to be shipped to where you're going to buy them. That usually means travel by road, rail or sea, and that also means pretty intensive carbon use. Shipping currently accounts for just over 700 megatons of CO2 emissions per year, which is only 2% of current greenhouse gas emissions. That is not necessarily massive in the grand scheme of things, but well, shipping cars isn't exactly space conscious, and when we're talking about vehicle transportation around the globe, unlike a container ship where literally every millimetre of space is taken up by a container full of stuff, car shipping, especially ro-ro, isn't quite as densely packed. And how do I put this? Shipping EVs around the world isn't exactly affordable. Not only do you have to contend with fossil fuel costs for shipping, there's also insurance costs, which have dramatically increased in recent years following some rather high-profile incidents in the last decade or so. The loss of an entire shipload of brand new cars, whether they're EVs or conventionally fueled, is a huge cost sink for a shipping company and thus their insurer to bear. But worse, if a storm is large enough to drive salt-rich seawater into the hold of a ro-ro cargo ship, regardless of the fuel source of the vehicles can and do catch fire, and a large fire in a vessel carrying a bunch of cars is... how do I put this? It's bad. It's just bad. You may no longer have your ship as well as its entire cargo. And therefore most shipping companies are unsurprisingly keen to avoid this outcome. It's one of the reasons why BYD now ships its own cars around the world in its own ships. And all of this is a really good reason why you want to try and make EVs locally. Reduced trade war risk, domestic manufacturing, meaning that you can easily tweak a vehicle to make it more specifically appeal to a market's taste, even if it's otherwise a global model. And then there's the reduced carbon footprint, local jobs, and so much more. But the real reason I want to see more local manufacturing, well, it's because it's quickly becoming more possible thanks to advances in technology and automation. We're now starting to see the concepts of factories in a box gaining momentum, and the proponents of it, including companies like Helix in the UK, suggests that this kind of manufacturing could help revolutionise the way that vehicles and more are made. The concept of factories in a box is that instead of building bespoke production facilities in a few key areas, a brand designs not only a vehicle that's going to be built, but the factory that will build the vehicle. And instead of outfitting that facility for volume, it's outfitted for efficiency, space, and the local market. Helix wants a future where an entire production facility can be sent, flat packed as it were, to a market where demand for a new vehicle is high. Then the facility is assembled, IKEA style, relevant power and water and waste treatment is added, and the facility can be churning out vehicles in about 6 months rather than a few years. It requires fewer staff than a traditional full-scale production line, can remotely be monitored, and because it relies more heavily on that automation, can reduce human-related errors on the production line, that is, assuming the robots are properly programmed, assembled, and QC staff on site are properly trained. And according to Helix, it's possible to get a facility churning out vehicles from a bare site in just 6 months, leveraging its cloud-based production smarts alongside local talent. Ox, again from the UK, wants to offer similar styles of production using completely knocked-down vehicles, or CKDs, that arrive from a larger, less regional facility in a format that makes them super easy to assemble locally using minimal tools without requiring each satellite factory to have a massively expansion production facility just sitting there. This isn't exactly new. For as long as we've been making cars, companies have been making CKD vehicles with varying levels of commercial success. Sometimes CKD vehicles are the loophole that allows an automaker to claim that a vehicle is made in a particular market when really it's just getting its final assembly there. Tesla, I'm looking at you. But there are other companies as well. Of course, where Ox and Helix differ to run-of-the-mill vehicles, admittedly, is that they are focused on utility rather than top speed and sexy tech-filled interiors. But for many around the world, functional, low-cost, easily serviced electric vehicles that can be locally fueled and locally maintained are more important than how many radio presets it has, or if you can watch Netflix while you charge. But that's a societal challenge we should all consider spending some time working to solve, especially in a world where resources are finite. After all, do we really need a massive screen in-car when we all tend to carry a mobile phone with us? Our hearts may say yes, but our heads might say no. The final key in the localization of EV production, it's not political buy-in, although that is helpful. It's not staff availability. It's a simplification of how our vehicles are put together and how we are moving towards more homogenized platforms. It's become a trend in the automotive industry that more and more automakers are making their lineups more homogenized. From Ford using the motor found in the Ford F-150 Lightning in its Ford Marquis Rally, through to single platforms designed to underpin an entire family of vehicles. The EGMP platform from Hyundai Kia Genesis is a great example of this. The more shared parts and commonality there is between models, the easier it is for automakers to shift production to regional facilities designed to handle just that platform. And of course, there are benefits there from local training and local education. It's really common for automakers to establish training programs at local learning institutions to help build the numbers of local staff they need and the qualifications those staff need to work on the production line. But that can extend further. Those who train to make those vehicles are in a far better position to also work on those vehicles further down the line. And since EV technician programs can work for both those on the factory floor and those in the aftermarket industry, sponsoring EV production and local institutions means more catered people to a region's needs and the improval of the quality and availability of aftermarket service, be it from an official dealership or from an independent specialist. Making cars locally, buying them locally, and keeping local communities engaged on the vehicles being built is not only more resilient, but it builds pride in a community, rejuvenates that community, and ensures that vehicles can remain on the road for as long as possible, long after they roll off the production line. Because if you understand how a vehicle is put together, you're more likely to be able to keep it on the road. The big challenge, though? Yeah, we have to try and convince automakers to swap out shareholders and CEO pay for truly equitable, flexible manufacturing that leverages the best of modern tech and community cohesion. Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord chat room, on our Patreon page, or you can reach out to us using Mastodon or Blue Sky. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of more than 1,500 people who help fund this channel using Patreon and YouTube, helping us cover our bills, pay our team, and making sure that we can remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There are a range of different tiers you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, just under $11 a year. We've had so many headaches with our credit list in the last few months. I'm sorry, it's been down to a non-functioning program we were using to pull the list out, but today's list has been manually generated, so please do let us know if you're not on there and should be. We are, after all, only human-ish. A huge welcome to our newest supporters: Steve Abernathy, Mike Nichols, Zach Kane, Philip Atkins, Kat, Rob Thomas, Ryan S., Laura, Jay Alor, Celia Gonzalez, France G. France, Nicole Huang, oh yeah, Pedro Huget, Duran Valentin, Winfred Gerlach, John Trindle, Sarah Hendrika Biketon, Edward Kufka, Stephen Beatty, Jonathan Rees, MJY, Owen Patrick, and Gail Jackson. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame. And remember, you can also now gift membership to someone else. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations. And we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. The address is listed below. And if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store also in the down below. We've got some fantastic content coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you very soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we also think that you should look at this one. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving!